we gave the upper range in terms of eating strictly beef, but what would that mean and how would that compare to the average diet that is not consuming, like just straight beef on a daily basis? And Elliot has some of those numbers that he's going to talk about, so we can have kind of like a basis of comparison.
Yeah, we thought that that's absolutely essential for this conversation, is to have a sense of what is the baseline diet like, how does it compare when you look at the numbers. So what we had to do is come up with a diet scenario that we thought was baseline, and so what we came up with was a diet that is 50% of your calorie needs are met through consumption of chicken, okay, and 25% is through rice, 22.5, and another 22.5% is through potatoes, and the last little bit there, 2.5%, is met through cabbage. So we took, the calorie densities of all these different food items, add them all up, looked at, our average person, needs 2,500 calories per day per person, and worked at how much weight is that per person for each food item. For something like rice, we're talking 175 kilograms a year per person. And something like chicken, we're talking 144 chickens based on the average weight of a chicken. Mm-hmm. For space, raising chickens takes up a lot less space. So we looked at two different scenarios here. One where you had basically a battery cages system. Okay, those birds only need about 0.2 meters squared per chicken. So that requirement, if you were to expand that for a year for one person, is 25 meters cubed per person. Okay, and then if you were to look at chickens being raised free range, so they get to go out and peck on the bugs and grass out in farmland, you're talking
like a happy old chicken life.
Happy chickens are good chickens.
Instead of being crammed and sitting on each other in like tight cages and
instead of being squashed. And so they need a bit more room, but it's not considerably a lot more. It's 1.3 meters cubed per bird, which works out to about 175 meters cubed per year per person.
Was that 1.3 versus 0.2?
Yeah, that was 1.3 versus,
Well, I mean, that's 6 times more, right? That's, damn, 6 times more room.
For sure. It is a lot more room. But I mean, in perspective of somebody having a little bit of property, the chances that you could actually raise your own chickens and meet half your calorie intake for a year, it doesn't seem unrealistic,
right,
based on those numbers.
It's feasible.
Feasible for sure. We also took a look again at, how does that compare to the farm land needed? So if you had 100% of the population in Canada or the US adapting this diet, land use wise, of the land use that's assigned to agriculture, it would only take up 4% in Canada and 6% in the US.
4%. That's crazy.
And that's 100% of the population adapting the diet.
So just as a reminder, when I talked about the carnivore diet and the land consumption associated with that, if, say, for example, 50% of the population were to adopt it in Canada, that was already 185% of the land that's devoted to agriculture, and in the US, that's 300%. So essentially, it's not feasible. But over here, when we look at the other diet substitute that we have, the alternative, when we have 100% of the population adopting that specific diet, we're only consuming 4%. Yeah, 4% of the land that's devoted for agriculture. So that's, you can see a huge difference associated between the two. That's crazy.
And this continues on. Like when we look at the CO2 emissions per day per person for this mixed diet scenario, we have it at basically 6 kilograms of CO2 per day per person, which in comparison to the car, which was at 10.5 kilograms of CO2, which in comparison to the carnivore, which was 30, right?
Right.
Kilograms.
30.
So, considerably less.
5 times less. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And then lastly, we, looked at the water for this. And even with the water needs for rice paddies and growing potatoes and cabbage and watering chickens, you are only looking at about 0.5 Olympic swimming pools per year per person. And I mean, I say only loosely there because I still think it's a
fair amount.
It's a fair amount.
It's
Half
decent.
an Olympic pool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's no 2 Olympic swimming pools.
It's true.
Like the carnivore diet.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at a quarter of the amount of volume, but nonetheless, 0.5.